Hey, welcome to Level Pixel Level. Today I'm just going to show you some of the new masking features in Blender Grease Pencil. About a year ago I made a video talking about how to rig an eye in a bunch of different ways. And when I rigged this eye I did use the old masking features in Blender 2.82 and it's changed a lot since 2.83. So I just want to review some of the changes and talk about some techniques you can use with these new setups and how it kind of can simplify things. Let's get right to it. Okay, so I'm in a clean file here, and I'm going to add a new object. I'm just going to add a new grease pencil object, and it's going to be blank. I'm going to flip to draw mode, and I'm just going to add a circle down here. Just check your strength. I think by default it comes in at 0.6. Just make sure that's on 1. And I'm just going to click and drag, and if I hold shift, I'll make a circle. I'll just hit enter to confirm. Okay, so this will look a little dim right now, and that's just because there's no material on it. So I'm going to click new, and I'll just call this eyeball. And I'm going to flip to edit mode. If I hit A, I can select everything. And Alt S will just scale this. So I just want to scale that up a little bit. Okay, so usually when I'm working on Grease Pencil, I like to have two properties panels opened at the same time. So I usually just duplicate this panel over and I'll flip it to a properties panel. And I'll leave this one on the Grease Pencil data properties. And this one over here, I'll leave on the material properties. So I'm just going to rename this to eyeball as well. And I'm going to left click on this little down arrow right here, and I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm just going to rename this to pupil. What I usually do now is I'll lock the eyeball layer. I'll go to edit mode, and I'll just select it and I'll just scale it in. I'm going to add a new material. I'm going to call this pupil. I'm just going to click assign, and this one I'm going to fill. Okay, just for right now, I'm just going to go to the eyeball and I'm going to fill it with like a blue color just so we can check out how this masking is going to work. So the new masks actually live in the properties panel, and it's this masks option right here, and it's off by default. If I turn this on, nothing changes yet, but I get these plus and minus icons here. If I hit the plus, I can now choose other layers in my scene. I'm going to choose this eyeball layer. Now if I flip to edit mode and grab this pupil, as I move outside of the eyeball, it disappears. So the eyeball is masking the pupil here. There's one more option. There's this little invert mask option here. If I click on that, it'll actually invert the selection. So now it can't go outside of there. And just a couple quick things with masking. I'm just going to add another layer, and I'm just going to quickly add a cube here. So now I have an eyeball and a cube. I'm going to click back on my pupil and turn off the invert, and you can add another layer. So I'm going to add this GP layer here, which is just my square. And now as I grab the eyeball, it's going to mask between them both. But you may have noticed that it's not visible here because masking is not represented with layers, meaning because my GP layer is on top of the pupil layer, it's going to hide it. So if I move it down, now it's going to show up. So remember that masking and layer order kind of affect each other as you're trying to work with this. So if I have my pupil selected and on this GP layer, I'm just going to rename this to square. If I invert the square layer, it's a little weird. As I come off the eye, it's not visible. It's because the eyeball still has a regular mask on it. If I invert both of them, now that invert will take over. Just something to be aware of as you're playing with that invert mask option, if you have multiple layers stacked up, might override based on what's there first. So I can turn invert off both and just move this back to here. Okay, so let's make this a bit more advanced. I'm just going to grab the pieces here, just move them over. I'm going to rename this to lid actually, and I'll grab my square and I'm just going to move it above the eye. I'm just going to scale it over, move it about here. I'm going to hit Alt S to just scale up the edging just to match the eye, and that's looking good right there. Let's change some things over here. I'm going to add a new material, and I'm going to call it lid. And I'll just click assign as I have the lid selected here. I'm going to fill this with like a blue color for now. Okay, so the lid is going to come down and hide the eye. Now right now it's below the pupil, so I'll just move it above. And that's kind of what I want that eyelid to do. It's going to be a different effect where the eyelid's going to sort of cover the eye as it comes down. So I'm going to make two masks that sort of point at each other now. So I'm going to click on eyeball, and I'm going to add a mask, and I'm going to add the lid. Now it's going to hide right now, and I'm going to invert this mask. So as it comes down, that is hiding the eyeball. But I also want to mask the lid with the eyeball. So with the lid selected, I'm going to click on mask and I'm going to add it to the eyeball. Now as the lid comes down, it's also masking the eyeball, but the eyeball is masking the lid. So now you have this situation where the eyeball and the lid are dependent on each other and they're sort of masking each other. Let me just fix one thing here on the eyeball. I just want to change the base color to be white here, just so I get something fun like that. Okay, so now that I have this lid selected here, I'm just going to do Shift D and drag it down. And now I have this really fun, simple eyelid here. That's also going to cover the pupil, just because the lid is above the pupil level. Let's add one more layer. I'm going to add highlight. Just to give this a little bit of character, I'll move this down so it's above the pupil. And I'm going to add a new material here, and I'm going to call it highlight. And I'm just going to add a circle. I'll just add it right there so I can see it, and that's looking good right there. The highlight, it's not going to have a stroke, it's just going to have a fill, and it's going to have a white fill. I'll just move it here, I'll scale it in. You know what, let's add two more, just for fun. Let's add one there, and I'll duplicate one there as well. So the highlight is going to mask to the pupil level here. So I'm going to click add, oops. So I'm going to click add and add it to the pupil, just so the highlights won't show up outside of that pupil level. Okay, now as I drag down the lid, I'll get that, and I'll drag this one up, and I get that. I get a really fun eye shape. So let's add a little bit more character to this as well, and let's just look at the lid for a second. I'm just going to drag this one down, and I'm going to turn off masking on the eyelid for a second. I don't have to delete my mask, I can just click this option here. So if I go to edit mode, I have these points here. Now these points are really rigid, so there's only really one point here, and I want to smooth that out. So I could use a sub D modifier. So under the modifier stack, I have this sub D option here, and I can turn this up. But I do find that the sub D tends to favor one side over the other. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a line here. I'll just hit enter. And now when I go to edit mode, I'll just turn down my divisions here. You'll see that that's sort of moving my points. Like as I'm adding new points, it's kind of moving the position of that point. So if I drag down here, it's actually also moving here. And it's a little unpredictable as to how that curve is going to work. I'm going to fix that by changing the way the subdivision works. So instead of Catmull Clark, I'm going to change it to simple. Now it's just a subdivision, but I still get that flat line between there. And it's actually adding these extra points here, which is fine. But this is a very nice uniform subdivision now. So I can still play around with the numbers that I have. So I'm going to put that at 3. And now I'm going to add a smooth modifier. And I can put the factor up to 1. And now I can repeat this as many times as I want. But what this gives me is a nice smooth eyelid like this. So with this, I can create usually most of the shapes that I want to make on my character. One last thing with this though is I only want this to affect the lid group. So here I have my lid layer. So I'm going to come to the modifiers, and under influence, under layer, I'm going to put this to lid, and I'll put this influence to lid. These are the only ones that I want that to influence. So I'll go back to my layers and I'll flip on my masks again. And now I can drag this down. I can drag that down and I can get really, really fun lid shapes. Now it's very tough to select all the other things here, so I'm just going to undo that and I'm going to lock out my other layers here. Now when I drag this down, I get that really fun lid shape. And I can start playing around with getting some really fun expressions on there. This is all without a rig. So in another video, I'm going to talk about why you might want to rig this and how to rig this. Let me undo that though, and let's actually mirror this over, and then we're going to add an eyebrow as well. So I'm going to add one more layer here, and I'm going to call it brow. And for the eyebrow, I'm going to add one more material, and I'm just going to call this brow. Okay, I'm going to flip to draw mode, and I'm just going to drag out a line. It's looking good like that, and I can just hit E just to extrude that up to here, and just hit enter again. We'll flip back to edit mode, and now what I can do is actually scale this up a little bit, And I actually want to scale it a little bit longer. So I'm not going to do anything with my brow except for like let it sit over the eye. I'm going to let the lid mostly deal with the, here I'll unlock the lid and just show you what I mean. I'll select on the lid, move it down. And if I select on the brow, move it down, I'll just sort of let it do its own thing. I'm not going to have the eyebrow cover up the eye at any point. So I'll bring back up the lid. Okay, so let's mirror this entire thing over now. I'm actually going to use the mirror modifier. So I'm going to add a modifier and I'm going to add a mirror, and it's going to duplicate everything over. And I'm just going to drag it to the top of my stack, and I'll click down this arrow and just click apply. Now modifiers can't be added in Paint, Sculpt, or Edit mode, so it's got to flip back to object mode, and now I can hit apply. So now this is mirrored. I just want to fix one thing. My highlight's looking a little weird, so if I just go back to my layers here, on my highlight, I'm just going to unlock it and just move these over. I can select a whole geometry as well just by hovering over it and hitting L on my keyboard, and I'll just select it. Cool. So now I have two lid pieces here that I can just drag down, get some really fun expressions with that. And I have this eyebrow shape that I could keep playing around with. Very last thing I want to do is add two more modifiers actually for the eyebrow shape. I want it to have the sub D and the smooth as well. So I'm going to add a subdivision and I'm going to add a smooth. And this is only going to affect the eyebrow layer. Just so that as I pose that eyebrow, I can maintain a really nice curve there. Now I'll give it a little bit more smooth and I'll give it another division on the sub D. Cool, so now I can have lots of fun with that eyebrow shape there. All right, I'll just undo that move and I'm gonna add one last layer here. I'm just gonna call it BG. So add a layer here and I'll call it BG. I'm going to select on my lid material and I'll just flip on draw. I'm just gonna add a cube in the background. Just have something behind my character, almost as if that was the face color. The really nice part about the lid masking to the eyeball is that it won't obscure anything else. So if you had a whole head shape here, you're not going to block it. It's only affecting the eyeball, and it's not going to affect anything else. Like if you had an ear or a mouth on this character, it wouldn't get in the way. So that's everything for this video. I just wanted to talk about some of the new masking features, some of the options for getting a nice eyebrow shape, how you can use the smooth and the sub D to sort of shape the brow, and just how you can use this to sort of start posing out your character. You don't necessarily need a rig for this stuff. So I have gone over other videos where I've built a rig, and I'd like to make a whole video just talking about why you might want to build a rig for your characters, and just some of the use cases for it. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me in this video. It's because of them that I can keep making these videos. Head on over there if you want early access, some exclusive content. I have 3 tiers. The beginning tier is only $2, and with that you get early access and you get to support me and this channel. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.